This is a piece of context for what you're about to see. I have been in advanced production on a in-depth conversation series, I guess I'll call it. And we were actually just getting ready to film our pilot episode when something unexpected happened. A man who is perhaps responsible for the most pain and suffering of my life personally, a man named Julio. This man is responsible for the murder of my ex-girlfriend in Nicaragua in 2006. He has been in prison for the last 17 years, and I was just informed that he was secretly released from prison a couple days ago. We were, for weeks we've been gearing up to film this pilot episode. We had our camera crew here, everything was set to go, and I received this information. And so what you're going to see is we decided to pivot and actually have a conversation about what I just found out, what it means to me personally. And so this was not pre-planned. Just wanted to give context for why there's nice cameras and lights. So that's what this is. This is me being interviewed by a friend, talking about what's happened in Nicaragua in the last couple days.
There's a man named Julio Martin, also known as Rosita. He was tried alongside of you, which doesn't make sense from my perspective. You guys were both in court together, both convicted, both sentenced to 30 years. Your case was overturned in appeals. His was withheld. And so for the past 17 years, he's been serving the sentence. However, there's photo evidence of him just a couple days ago being secretly released from the Nicaraguan government.
That's right. Yeah. So it's bizarre to even summarize it because it just doesn't make any sense from a due process standpoint. But we were both charged with Doris's murder. We were both detained. We both were sent to trial. The trial made no sense. It was almost like two separate trials happening in the same courtroom. I testified. He chose not to. We were both convicted. I was wrongfully convicted. He was rightfully convicted. Again, there was very clear evidence that he was involved in the murder. A year later, the case was ruled on in an appellate court, and my conviction was overturned, and I was released, and his conviction was confirmed. So he's been in prison for 17 years. This is huge news. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He, as far as we know for sure, he is out of prison. We don't believe there was any sort of judicial or formal process that normally would be required for someone to be released. He was with his feet up on his table just the day before yesterday, eating food. The rumor was that he got released because he was very sick. So apparently he had gone to a hospital where he was for a couple weeks, and he got released kind of quietly out the back door of the hospital.
So I just can't imagine, what kind of emotions are you feeling as you're processing this information?
I don't know what the emotion is. It's bizarre. Again, it almost feels like I keep having to sort of engage in this public conversation. It is one of the sort of bizarre aspects of these big international show trials. Like, obviously, I'm home, I'm free, life is good, but this comes completely as a surprise. I'm actually really surprised that this hasn't already kind of created a news cycle in the Nicaraguan news media. I believe that it will soon.
Can you give a brief summary of what actually happened in this case?
Sure. So I moved to Nicaragua in 2004 and started a bilingual lifestyle magazine with a friend of mine, and had the time of my life. Really enjoyed the country and explored it. It was very sort of unexplored at the times, world-class surfing, and our magazine project was called The Bridge. It was sort of educating locals that were on the receiving end of this sort of wave of cash and development that started to come into particularly the Nicaraguan coastline around 2004, 2005, 2006. A lot of the sort of expats who had made money and bought property in Costa Rica saw Nicaragua as the new Costa Rica. So the development there was happening at a rate never seen before, and that's really what our magazine was addressing. When I was living there, I met a local girl. Her name was Doris, Ivania Jimenez. She was the waitress in a seafood restaurant that I used to have lunch at. And after some time of getting to know each other, we started dating. And we dated for about a year. And I was young, mid-20s, ambitious, and actually moved to the capital city of Nicaragua, which is called Managua. And at that time, we split up. It was kind of an amicable breakup for, kids in their 20s. And we spoke over the phone maybe half a dozen times over the next 6 months. And I saw her on 2 occasions when she would come to Managua to buy clothing for her store that she had back in her hometown, San Juan del Sur. And 6 months after we split up, she was brutally murdered in her clothing store on Tuesday, November 21st of 2006. I was in the magazine office in a conference actually with a bunch of staff, and I received a phone call and was informed that she had been found dead in her store. I was in shock. None of it made sense. I cleared out the schedule, obviously, for the rest of that day. And me and one of my staff members, who actually also knew Doris very well, we drove the 2-hour drive from Managua to San Juan del Sur, mourned her death with family and friends for 2 days, and then 15 minutes after the funeral, I was arrested by the Nicaraguan police and sent to prison for a crime I didn't commit. It was a long, lonely journey just to the depths of human existence for me.
When's the last time you spoke with Doris's family?
Interesting. This is such a crazy aspect to this case. I've never had any communication with Doris's mother after my conviction. At the very first hearing, she gave me a huge hug and said, mijo, my son, I know you had nothing to do with this. Don't worry, this is going to get worked out. Again, I was in a completely different city at the time Doris was murdered. I had nothing to do with her murder. I was with an entire staff in my magazine office. I ended up presenting 10 sworn affidavits from different people who saw me throughout that entire day. And she was aware of that in the early days of after Doris's murder. Doris's father, same thing. He said, Eric, don't worry, just stay strong. This is going to work out. And at some point, we were later informed that the police detective in charge manipulated Doris's mother and lied to her and told her that I had confessed to the crime and that she was going to see that once the case file was made available. When she finally got a copy of the case file, she saw there was no confession because I never confessed. And she actually did an interview where she said she went back to that detective saying, you said there was a confession. I don't see a confession. And he said, oh, he did it orally. So, the Nicaraguan police were very savvy and crafty in terms of manipulating the emotions of, Doris's family, who of course were heartbroken. Doris's father completely disappeared. He didn't come to any of the hearings after that. He didn't attend the trial. He never spoke out, in the press. In contrast, Doris's mother became the most outspoken person, calling for my conviction. She started a bunch of rumors that were really damaging to me in the court of public opinion. We had some unconfirmed information that she was actually paid money to turn public opinion against me. But a couple of years ago, so fast forward, 15 years, I had always like kind of wondered, like, I wonder why Doris's father disappeared. I wonder if it's because he knew that I was innocent, but he also knew how dangerous it was to kind of be close to all of that, crisis, and he was keenly aware how easy it would be to be fingered and incriminated by this corrupt police force. And it was always just kind of like a thought tucked away. And a couple years ago, he just came to mind. And literally the next day, I opened my Facebook page for the first time in years. And I received a direct message from Doris's father. And it was just one word, hola. And I really I was like, man, what are the chances? So I actually engaged with him, went back and forth a little bit, eventually got on the phone with him. I was very cautious, and I was really disappointed that he didn't want to talk about Doris's death. He didn't want to talk about the case. In fact, he eventually asked me for money.
Wow.
And it was very clear to me that it didn't feel like he even cared about Doris's life at all. So, I've had a very clear boundary with him. And actually, we got this information about Julio Martin, his nickname is Rosita, that he got secretly released from prison last Sunday. And on Monday, I got another direct message on Facebook from Doris's father saying, hola Eric, I hope everybody's doing well. And I just responded and said, hello, Don Ivan, it's nice to hear from you, and I just immediately said, like, I continue to pray that there would be justice for Doris and her unresolved murder case, and I hope you are too. Good night. And he just responded and said, buenas noches. That's it. Like, he didn't want to talk about it at all.
Like, isn't that the hope with Rosita, though? He's out. Like, do you have an appeal to him? Like, hey, we've heard you've confessed. Will you do it publicly? Will you bring closure to me, to my family, to Doris's family, to the nation of Nicaragua?
Yeah, so I mean, if it's true that Rosita is deathly ill, obviously he has a right to medical attention. I don't wish death on him. But I do wish that he would confess and he would set the record straight and he would bring closure to Doris's family, her friends, to the Nicaraguan people. I mean, again, I'd love to know, has he changed? Like, is he repentative? Those are all some of the questions that I have for him.
When I think about what's going on with this case, it was almost a predecessor to what we're seeing happen in the United States with the politicization of the justice system. Have you processed that? Are there similarities? Are there things that feel eerily similar?
Yes. An independent judiciary is essential for there to be a healthy democracy. And, even though I consider myself a pretty experienced businessman and had dealt with attorneys, when I was arrested, I was completely naive when it came to the criminal justice process. So, again, I was in a different city at the time of Doris's murder. I thought, this is an airtight alibi, cell phone triangulation records, and my signature on a credit card voucher in a different city. Surely those things are going to matter. And they didn't. Because when there's power and influence outside the law system, when a politician can make a whisper in a hallway or pick up the phone and order a judge to rule one way or the other, the judicial system becomes a political weapon. And so, I was worried when I started to see some of these lawfare cases happen in our own country here in the United States.
Well, I think there's religious persecution, there's political persecution, but now there's religious prosecution, political prosecution as well. And I think when you think about what happened with you in this case in Nicaragua, what's happening in America in 2024, if I were you, I'd be feeling like, man, these things, there's a coalescing of them.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest wrongful conviction in history was that of Jesus Christ. And we don't usually think of his story in the context of a wrongful conviction, but people bared false witness. And we are in a climate today where if you're just accused, it's almost like the damage is done. It's like an accuser is above an accused. If you ask questions and you introduce nuance, it's almost offensive or labeled as gaslighting. And so, it has been sort of surreal for me to watch things that traditionally would only happen in developing countries where there was just a lot of corruption or the civil-military relation wasn't very clear. But it's happening here. Yeah, I'm very, very concerned.
Do you hope to have a conversation with Rosita?
I would. I have to be careful. I mean, I'm represented by the Innocence Center in California, and they are interested in trying to contact him to see if he would be willing to confess and do it formally in some sort of an affidavit. I want to know the truth. I want to know the details of what happened to Doris, and I think it would be good for him to confess. I mean, we'll have to see through what mechanism he was actually released. If he was released legally, then he probably can't go back to prison for the same crime. So he shouldn't have anything to worry about. But I do want to talk to him.
There's a famous clip of a woman in Nicaragua online talking about your case, and she's basically just yelling and saying it's because you have money that you're able to get off. How did you get off despite being a pawn?
So Doris's mother knew her people, and I don't know if it was her idea or if the police gave her the idea. I'm not sure, but right before the trial, it said that I had offered her $1 million to drop the charges, and it had such a huge impact. Front page headlines, but it was also nonsensical. She was a private citizen. She didn't have the power to drop the charges. I was being prosecuted by the government of Nicaragua. But she knew her people, and there are a lot of cases where people pay bribes and, because of power and access, don't face justice. So I think it was very believable for Nicaraguan people that someone would do that. And, I think that did a lot of damage in the court of public opinion.
Was there ever a temptation or even instruction for you to do something like that?
Never. We never entertained a bribe. Initially, me and my family did what any family would do. We, when I was arrested, kind of turned to who do we know that's connected in Washington, D.C., and eventually ended up hiring a big Washington, D.C. law firm. And they tried their best, but they didn't really have any ground game. And I ended up being wrongfully convicted. And afterwards, they said, we can't do anything. The only way for you to get Eric out is to pay a bribe. And they said, we can't do that because of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but we can introduce somebody who can help facilitate that. He was a Latin America specialist. And when he found out that was kind of the way they teed up the introduction with him, he was furious. And, he immediately started to teach my family and eventually me on how these cases happen. He said, this is not a miscarriage of justice. In Spanish, it's referred to as un aborto de la justicia. A miscarriage is not intentional. He said, Eric is being kidnapped through the institution. This is an institutional kidnapping. What do you do in a kidnapping? You contact the kidnapper and you ask what they want. And your objective is to free the hostage. So he really came alongside, my family and myself and sort of helped to train us to really have a more accurate understanding of what we were up against. But he said, bribes don't work in a case like this. Number one, this case is way too high profile. Number two, you'll only just have a line of people around the corner with their hand out. And it's illegal to pay bribes. As a U.S. citizen, we have to adhere to certain laws, and it would be illegal for a U.S. citizen to pay a bribe. But most importantly, he knew how important it was going to be for us to build a coalition of people of integrity and influence in the country. And if we were going around paying bribes, those people wouldn't want to get anywhere near us. And so not a single bribe was paid in my case. He just built a coalition. He took a laptop around the country and met with one person at a time and just presented the facts.
It's still one of the things for me that feels confusing is how can two people who were totally different people, totally different circumstances, not friends, not colleagues, be tried and convicted of the same thing? Have you ever talked to Rosita?
It doesn't make sense because it didn't make sense. There was no reason to. It was almost like two different trials were happening in the same courtroom. I testified in my defense, and Rosita chose not to. They never established any connection to us because there wasn't any connection. And when we were in prison, the prison guards, I think they intentionally kept us separate. And there were two occasions where I got to interact with him. One was very bizarre, and I wrote about it extensively in my book. But the one that really mattered to me most was we were moved to a different prison once. We were moved around quite a bit. And the Nicaraguan government did that to me so that my attorneys couldn't get organized with me. It was like my attorney would have a meeting scheduled, and that morning they would move me to a different location. But the guards, I think accidentally, just temporarily put me and him in a holding cell for a couple minutes. And I hated him. I was very angry because he had lied and said things that incriminated me. But I kind of set that aside because I knew I needed to ask these questions. And so I asked him where he was at the time of Doris's murder. And he said that he was surfing at a surf spot called La Peña, I believe it was called. And I immediately knew he was lying because Doris was murdered in November, which is the winter in Nicaragua, and there are no waves. That spot doesn't break in the winter. So I knew he was lying. And that was the last time I ever talked to him.
Do you still hate him?
No, I don't feel hate. I mean, there was a point where I remember being in prison in the first weeks, first months, and the overwhelming emotion I had was anger. And I remember even punching concrete walls because I just felt so much anger. And, I had a very, very profound spiritual sort of awakening, gave my life to Christ in a prison cell that actually had been a drug trafficker's prison cell, and ultimately experienced freedom even though I was behind bars. But one of the most important things that I really learned was how important it was for me to forgive. So I actually found a way to find forgiveness for everyone who had wronged me while I was still in prison.
Do you have a message that you can give him?
Julio, mi mensaje para ti es que si es verdad que estás enfermo, obviamente tienes derecho a atención médica. No te deseo nada malo, y si es verdad los rumores que estás enfrentando la muerte, tampoco te deseo la muerte. Mi deseo es que tienes la valentía de hablar, de confesar, de detallar exactamente qué es lo que pasó ese día, ese martes, el 21 de noviembre. ¿Qué hiciste? ¿Por qué lo hiciste? ¿Quién estaba contigo? Eso le va a traer mucha paz a la familia de Doris, a los amigos de Doris, al pueblo de San Juan del Sur, al pueblo nicaragüense. Haz lo correcto. Si tú saliste de la cárcel por una vía legal, legítimo, no tienes que temer de que vas a volver a la cárcel. Hables, tengas valentía, haz lo correcto. a los periodistas honestos en Nicaragua que investiguen cómo es que Julio Martín salió de la cárcel. Yo lo que tengo entendido es que no hubo ningún procedimiento legal por la corte. Y eso yo creo que el pueblo de Nicaragua merece saber qué es lo que sucedió ahí. Todo el mundo sabe que en Nicaragua ahora mismo la justicia es difícil, que haya justicia, especialmente cuando no le conviene a esa imagen que está tratando de mantener el gobierno. Yo amo a Nicaragua, yo no guardo rencor, yo deseo lo mejor para todo el pueblo nicaragüense, pero sí, la libertad de Julio Martín es algo muy significativo en este caso, y puedo confirmar que él fue puesto en libertad este fin de semana pasado. Él ayer estaba en su casa con las piernas encima de la mesa, comiendo un plato de comida. O sea, el hombre no se está muriendo como dijeron ahí la gente del sistema. Así que, Julio, vuelvo y repito, por favor, hables, di la verdad. Es hora que hables.